Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Here in the United States, where I'm speaking, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. But I know we have people actually from 25 different countries, from all over the world, on all continents, as a matter of fact. So I really, really appreciate your interest and your willingness to join us this morning. We have a lot to cover. This is a major issue for all of us. We've been working on this problem here in the United States through the Institute for Safe Medication Practices. We're known as a non-profit organization, charitable organization here in the United States. And we have sister organizations in Spain, ISMP Spain, in Canada, ISMP Canada, in Brazil. And we're very happy to work with them. We also work with a group called the International Medication Safety Network, and I want to tell you about that as well. So this is primarily an international call. I know that we also have colleagues from the United States that are on this call, and there is a lot to learn for all of us, I am sure. We will have the ability to ask questions. It will not be done live, however. That will be done on your screen. There is an area that you can type in a question. If we can get to them before the call ends in an hour from now, we will do that. Otherwise, we will get back to you and answer the question offline. So if you have any questions as we go along, please do so. So this has been an area of interest of ours for quite some time. And we wanted to do an international program. And obviously, there are some expenses associated with that. So we were very, very happy to get the support of Novartis to put this program together and take care of the expenses, et cetera. So in the United States, we have learned a lot because we have a practitioner or provider reporting program. And you see on this slide number 2, 3 different programs that we actually run. We even have one for consumers. And we have a nurse here at ISMP. We're a multidisciplinary organization, so we have nurses and pharmacists on location here in our office and some other locations around the states. But also we have a medical director who's an anesthesiologist not at a children's hospital that's not too far from our office near Philadelphia in the United States. This program started many years ago, and anyone can participate simply by sending us an email or going to our website where we have a reporting area, and I'll show you that a little bit later. This is a voluntary practitioner reporting program or consumer reporting program. There's no mandate. We don't have any authority to require reporting. Some of our individual states here in the United States do, but we are not related to any of them directly. We do have one contract with our own state here in Pennsylvania with another organization called the ECRI Institute, which is also international in scope, to work with the folks in our state who operate a state-based reporting program. And they receive a lot of data. And it is very rich in information, I must say, in many cases. Our reporting program is really gives practitioners and others a chance to interact with us directly, and we interact with them. And we learn about labeling errors, packaging errors, practice-related issues, nomenclature-related issues, naming of products, and so on. And as I said, this has been going on for many, many years. We started actually in the 1970s as a journal column, but then it developed into a full-time operation back in the 1990s. As a matter of fact, this coming January will be our 25th year anniversary. We've been operating now 25 years. And, you know, obviously, we're very proud of that, but there's so much that we wanted to begin sharing that we've learned, and also working with our international group, which I'll show you on the next slide. Right now, the program that I'm talking about not only captures medication errors, but also vaccine and vaccination-related errors. and as I said, also consumer errors. And we have publications. Our newsletter for acute care for hospitals goes out every 2 weeks since 1996. We've never missed an issue since then, every 2 weeks, except for Christmas. There are other programs have reports from time to time as well. So we hit several different audiences, including consumers with different publications. We work very closely with, as a matter of fact, I chair the International Medication Safety Network, or IMSN. And this is an international network mostly of established safe medication practice centers like ours. So the other ISMPs are all members, but there are other government agencies and pharmacovigilance centers and others even at universities that have joined the effort. We have a website, which is at the bottom of this slide, intmedsafe.net. If you are a practice center, a pharmacovigilance center, or a regulatory authority in your country, and you would be interested in participating in our program, please go to the website and learn a little bit more about us, and then you can contact me directly. And my email is mcohen@ismp.org. We do rely on dues in order to keep this going. So there is a dues payment that would be required, but please let us know if you are interested. We've done quite a bit of work internationally just within the last few years through the International Medication Safety Network, including a summit that we held in conjunction with a number of regulatory authorities around the world here in the United States, in Washington, at our U.S. Food and Drug Administration campus. I want to tell you a little bit more about that, but this program is really being run this morning by the Institute for Safe Medication Practices, not by the International Medication Safety Network. However, we work very, very closely with them. So, as I said, this is an international network. We promote safe medication practice, not only labeling and packaging and drug naming issues, but also practice-related issues. We actually have a meeting coming up in October, the end of October, in Cascais, Portugal, that'll be held in conjunction with the Portuguese Society of Hospital Pharmacists, and that's on October 29 and 30, but on the 28th, the Portuguese Society is having an educational program, and if any of you are interested, or if you're in Europe and can make it, we would be more than happy to have you join us. And again, our network email or website URL is intmedsafe.net. We do communicate in English. That is our main language. However, with translation software, etc., we are able to communicate. And when we have our educational programs, we generally do have translation available live. So that's usually what happens. So there are many important issues that have occurred with products, and I wanted to really spend our time today talking about labeling and packaging issues that really do lead to medication errors. And while we do have a program here in the United States for practitioner reporting, and it's been very, very active, it's really about getting the narrative information and pictures, photographs that we receive of packaging, of labeling, of screenshots from computer systems where somebody has chosen the wrong drug name off of a computer screen. That's the kind of thing we like to communicate. And we've come up with a number of system-based issues, changes that we want to recommend, not just to practitioners, but also to industry and to regulators. And that's what we've been doing over the past 6 months, and what we'll continue doing in Cascais, Portugal. So especially if you're a regulatory authority or in pharmacovigilance, we have a special section of our meeting in Portugal for pharmacovigilance centers. And especially if you are a regulator, you would be interested in this information. And I should say this does not apply to everyone. There's obvious differences in traditions and customs in each country. So things are a little bit different in languages. For example, in the United States, we feel that the abbreviation IU for international unit, which is often associated with heparin and even insulin and other products, is potentially dangerous because IU looks like IV even on a computer screen, and we've had drugs injected intravenously in ER. So we have dropped the word international and just used the word units, and we don't abbreviate that. But in some countries, for example, Spain, it isn't international units, it's units international, and it's completely different. It's different word, obviously in the Spanish language, but it's a different order. And so the same problem doesn't exist. And again, there are other customs. In many countries, you're using patient packs or dose packs as the primary mechanism for bringing a drug to the bedside. In the United States and in several other countries, we use unit dose. In other words, each dose of medication is individually packaged, and the nurse takes that to the bedside. And that has facilitated barcode scanning, which has really helped to reduce medication errors, according to a scientific study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. So we want to talk about that as well, because many of the companies are still not putting any sort of barcode, which limits the ability of hospitals around the world and also pharmacies around the world and their dispensing to have barcode scanning, which could identify the wrong medication being dispensed or administered. So anyway, these are the things we want to talk about on labeling and packaging. Dangerous abbreviations, look-alike labeling. We'll show you some of the graphics that we see. I have samples from other countries around the world, so you can see that it's an international problem. Our members of the International Medication Safety Network talk about this all the time. We complain about it. We do work with industry as much as we can, but there needs to be more of a coordinated effort. We see inconsistent and unclear expression of strength on labels. Sometimes the strength doesn't even appear on the primary display label or primary display. There's label clutter, so much information that it almost hides the most important information, like the strength. Highly stylized label graphics. We see this all over the world. Logos that are very large that are at the top of the label of a container, so that the drug name is maybe halfway down the label. And the thing that you see again and again throughout an entire product line is the company's label, highly stylized with color, etc. I want to show you some examples of that we really shouldn't tolerate. Overemphasis on company name and logos. Lack of contrast on glass ampules. We were amazed to find out that in some countries, over half of the injectable medications are in glass ampules, and we have black print on many of them, or blue print, and there's no background. And one company might have multiple products, and they're all packaged with that same style. And so who knows how many medication errors are happening because of mix-ups. I think another thing we've run across is a lack of reporting programs for providers to use. Individuals may contact the drug company, and in most cases, they would have to report that to the regulatory authority. But there isn't an organization that receives these reports and interacts with the drug companies on behalf of the practitioners, but also interacts with the regulators. No one wants to see a patient be hurt. And so I want to talk about reporting programs a little bit later on as well. And then finally, an inadequate prominence or even absence of reminders and warnings on labels like neuromuscular blockers or potassium chloride injection concentrate. And we have deaths that occur because of the wrong product being prepared and the lack of a good warning system. Next slide. So let us just take a look at some examples of dangerous abbreviations and dose designations. And I fully agree that you may not agree with all of our recommendations. But when we do meet together, as we did this past June in Washington, we had multiple countries represented, multiple regulators, 9 actually, including EMA, which represented obviously the European Union. And we had MHRA as well for England. There is agreement that something should be done with many of these items. So, for example, the U for the word unit. One of the earliest medication errors that we had was an overdose of insulin, and you can see the handwritten order. We don't use handwriting very much anymore in the United States. Perhaps you do, or perhaps you have long ago computerized your ordering system. But you can see how that can look like 60. And we had many accidents with tenfold overdoses. It can also sometimes look like a 4 or the abbreviation CC. And we've had wrong amounts administered to patients as well. So I know that in the United States, we do not allow this on labeling. We have occasionally seen it in some of the advertising, and we do contact the company and have them change it. I think the EMA a couple of years ago also recommended that industry no longer use this abbreviation. But it is still out there in many countries, and it is potentially dangerous. People may see it in print, and it seems clear as a bell, but they may take an order verbally or make notes, and they use the abbreviation, and later it gets misread as a tenfold overdose. So we want to work against using that particular abbreviation. This is IU, so that's international units, and I explained that already. This is a label from New Zealand. Another issue is numbers are zeros after a decimal point. I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but we still see it on labels, and so it's still a risk. And the problem here is if the decimal isn't seen on a computer screen or on a transcribed order, a patient will get a tenfold overdose. So in the United States, we forbid the terminal 0. Many of the label enhancements for safety over the years have started with the United States Pharmacopoeia's Labeling and Nomenclature Committee. And in a chapter in the United States Pharmacopoeia, Chapter 7 specifically, there are multiple items that have come through the reporting programs and been implemented by USP. And under our federal law, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, the Food and Drug Administration will almost always follow through with those recommendations, unless they have some reason for not doing so that they want to justify or that they can justify internally. So this has been a very effective way to get label changes. So here in the United States, this would be 3 milligram, not 3.0. Now, there are some biological products that might have this. This is only for drug products. So we're working to get the terminal zeros and the U for units, et cetera, off of our biologicals as well. Another issue we have, of course, is lookalike labeling. And we have literally hundreds of examples. I just chose a few here. This came from Belize. And I think you can easily see how this packaging looks so similar and how these highly stylized graphics kind of overwhelm your visibility, your senses, and can easily make things look alike, especially when they're stored near one another. It's very easy for somebody to pick up the wrong thing. Now, again, we are very fortunate in the United States that all of our medication, whether in a package like this, a large size, or a unit dose at the bedside, have a barcode on it. And that has been a very effective way. We're over 95% of U.S. hospitals scan medications at the bedside, the unit dose package, the pre-filled syringe, the pre-mixed mini bag or IV bag of a pre-mixed drug, or even a plain bag. And that also documents in the medical record for the patient, not just assures that it's the right drug that's been scanned. Yes, we sometimes have people bypass this system, which obviously is not what is supposed to happen. But by and large, we've been able to prove that this drastically reduces medication errors, the scanning system. But it starts with a lookalike labeling. And so we are working also to reduce the lookalike. Here's another example of fentanyl transdermal and the two different strengths. I think there's better ways to present the fentanyl patch strengths than the boxes in blue on the side. And again, the lines, the colors, all of it very much alike. This is a Canadian product. By the way, I should mention that some of these labels have changed long ago. I'm just using these from my files as examples. So there may have been improvements over the years with these products. Some of these products are 7, 8, 9 years old. Some of them are more recent, but I just use them for examples. Here's a good example. This came originally from the UK. And I think you can see the issue there with the colors being the same. And again, the graphics in red on the right, which attracts your eyes. You know, it basically calls out, this is our brand of atenolol, or our brand of tamoxifen, or folic acid, or whatever. And we want you to know our brand and use our brand. But that's not what we as providers, as practitioners, as nurses, pharmacists, doctors find helpful. We want the drug name to be the most prominent and the strength to be the most prominent. And we can do without all the logos and the things that make the package pretty, but also make them look alike. Another example, this came from colleagues in Colombia in South America. They have a very active program there amongst their hospital pharmacists to reduce medication errors, and also some of the industry has bought into this. And I'll show you an example of that with ampules in just a couple of minutes. But again, you can see the prominence of the drug name on the left, the blue bar on the right at the bottom, the same colors, and some of the wording, even the drug names can even look alike there. And you can see how easy it would be to mix these up. So we can do much better than this. We don't need logos like this. Same here. I think you can see the problems. This is from Australia. And we're talking about a concentrated potassium injection that could be fatal if it was injected instead of magnesium sulfate. This being from Denmark. And then I mentioned about the contrast on glass ampules. This is a very serious problem throughout the world. We should not tolerate this. There are a couple problems here. Most people are right-handed, and they hold the ampule between their thumb and forefinger in their right hand when they want to read the label. But the print on the label is not always oriented so that the person that is holding the ampule can read it easily. And the second issue is, it seems pretty clear when you see this picture, and that is once the ampule is removed from its package, it becomes extremely difficult to differentiate products when they have the same color labeling with no background on the glass ampule. This is a very, very common problem. We don't know what's going on up on the nursing units and how many errors are happening, if they even are recognized, if they get reported internally, and do they get reported to the manufacturer? And what does the manufacturer do about it? Or do they get reported to the regulatory authority? And what does the regulator do about it? These are questions we have in a lot of regions of the world. And many people now, for the past 10 years, have become intensively interested in patient safety. And they are looking for ways to improve things. We don't know what goes on a nursing unit. We need practitioner reporting programs to develop around the world. One of the things that we started a few years ago as ISMP Spain, ISMP Brazil, ISMP Canada, and ISMP US. We're not having any more ISMPs right now, but there are other practice centers that have developed. So we need to get a background on these ampules. We need to even have a barcode on them for hospitals that would like to start thinking about acquiring the scanners and the software, et cetera, and develop these programs that would drastically reduce product mix-ups. Here's a couple other examples. These are different drugs, ephedrine, and heparin, the second one from the right, both with these colored bands on the ampule neck that identify the product before it gets a label on it at the manufacturing level. A blue dot and the same color labels. And if these are turned in just a certain way, you would not be able to tell the difference between ephedrine and heparin. And you may bolus somebody with 5,000 units of ephedrine, or I'm sorry, heparin instead of ephedrine, or worse, bolus them with ephedrine instead of heparin, or give it subcutaneously. And we have had cardiac arrests where ephedrine was given inadvertently. So this is even with a color background or a label background. Sometimes there's problems with the way we label these ampules. Here's another example. Now, we found a lot of errors between bupivacaine and tranexamic acid, and I have the URLs for multiple articles from around the world where these cases were actually published. And that's what those two ampules are there on the right. We even had one here in the United States. And I'm not sure exactly how that happened. It wasn't reported to us. But the third one down is the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation. It was in their newsletter. So we need to do a much better job with ampule labeling, or not even use ampules. We've almost eliminated ampules here in the United States, and we're using drug vials. Here's another issue. Now, I was talking about this label position. And incidentally, you see on the label on the right, this is an older slide, but there's a ratio expression, 1 to 1,000. That's 1 milligram per milliliter. So that's the most concentrated form of epinephrine. That would be used, for example, maybe a 0.5 milligram for anaphylaxis. But there's also a 1 in 10,000. And we learned there were many, many mix-ups between these two. During a code, for example, a cardiac arrest, patients would get the 1 to 1,000 bolus instead of 1 to 10,000. And so we have eliminated the ratio expression on labeling in the United States. Our USP agreed to do that. It's been official now for a couple of years. And FDA has followed through. So the labeling now would say 1 milligram. But what I wanted to point out was the orientation there of the label and how readable it is for those that are right-handed. I think it's about 10 or 20% that are left-handed. And just a real quick, and I don't have a good picture of this, but if you look far to the left, beyond where the drug name is, all the way to the left, there's actually a lot number and expiration date there that's basically invisible. And what I wanted to point out there, and this is especially true in the United States, we have terrible labeling of low-dose polyethylene or other types of polypropylene plastic ampules. And the reason is, especially with the low-dose polyethylene, our FDA was concerned about inks and glue volatiles seeping in through the low-density polyethylene into the solution. And of course, who knows what that might mean for patients. So they do not allow ink or a label that has glue on it to touch the area where the drug is housed. So we have had to come up with other ways to label it. And one of the ways is they have embossed the drug names. This makes it impossible to read. And unfortunately, you can't have a barcode on these. So the barcode on this is exempted for these low-density polyethylene. This is polypropylene. So this is a little bit different, perhaps. We have not seen very much at all. Perhaps one drug in the United States, and it's a neuromuscular blocker, Narapin, comes in this type of container. So we've been pretty fortunate to stay away from it. Now, I mentioned about a change that was made by Colombia. Look at the top picture. Every one of these is a different drug. Now, I think you can see the problem that nurses in Colombia would have if these were being stored up on a nursing unit, which they do. And I've seen this in Brazil hospitals as well, easily mixed up. So the company learned about this and as a possibility, and look at the job that they did in labeling glass ampules. I think this is just a wonderful, wonderful example that took place within the last year or so. And it just shows me that, it can be done. Now, I don't know if this added to the expense. I doubt it. But even if it did, by a penny or two, I think it would be well worth it. But why aren't all manufacturers of ampules, if you're going to use that dosage form, doing something like this and putting a barcode on it? We know we're going to be using machine-readable codes of one type or another, or radio frequency ID perhaps in the future, that we'll get to the point where each product can be embedded with a chip very inexpensively. And it's time to start preparing for this. I also want to talk about expression of concentration and strength. This is something that we've learned the hard way. And you know, we've come up with a way to prevent medication errors also through the United States Pharmacopoeia and FDA, our US FDA, and something that we're trying to bring to an international level, and something that was discussed at our meeting in June. Both of these are identical. They both have 100 milligram in 5 ml. But the product on the left, which is a cancer drug, Camptisar, irinotecan, this was given 5-fold overdose again and again. And how did it happen? Because nurses would look at it and say, oh, there's 20 milligrams in this container. And they would reconstitute the whole thing and give 80 milligrams instead of, you know, or 5-fold overdoses instead of the right amount when they needed to give 80 milligrams. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, the volume is listed on the left. It's also listed on the right, but several years back, we began requiring all manufacturers in the United States to label primarily with the amount of drug in the container volume for parenterals. So the proper labeling is 100 milligram per 5 ml. And then we require a statement in parentheses immediately following, which is the per milliliter amount. And that has drastically reduced the number of errors that we had where, and this happened with other drugs too. For example, I'll show you a couple of others. Heparin. The product on the left, a 4 milliliter vial of heparin, which contains 40,000 units, but nurses gave 4 vials because they thought there was 10,000 if they had to make an IV with 40,000 units. So we made it a requirement for all manufacturers to put the total amount of drug per volume of the container. So our labeling is now 40,000 per 4 ml and 10,000 per ml. And there was agreement at our summit that this is something we should follow through with by other regulators. Now again, you may not agree with that, and you may have customs in your country that are different than what we are familiar with. Those are the kinds of things we need to debate. What is the best way to do this? We need to get input from practitioners, not just our regulators, not just our safe practice centers, not just pharmacists. We need to hear from nurses, not just nurses. We need to hear from anesthesiologists, from surgeons that might use a certain substance. And this is the kind of thing that we could do. Here's another. This one came from Singapore. Certainly looks like 50 milligrams is in the vial. It's 500 milligram, as you can see all the way at the top, 10 ml. People's eyes generally go to the drug name. Hopefully they'll miss the logo if that appears above. They'll go to the drug name and then the strength. And when they're rushed, when they're busy, when they're interrupted, when they're distracted, when they're not fully concentrating as they should be, and I think every one of us listening today probably has run into that situation ourselves. They see this as 50 milligram. They've only read part of the label. They don't scan back up to see the 10 ml. And a patient gets 500 milligram instead of 50. Yes, that has actually happened. Other examples. This says each 2 ml ampule contains 200 milligrams of ketamine. But when you look at the ketamine, it's 100 milligram per mil. But it's actually 200 milligrams in that container because it's a 2 milliliter container. So what is a nurse to think? They are up there making these errors in countries around the world because this is how they are currently being labeled. And that's what many of us working together around the world are out to change. So we enlist your support. That's why we're doing this thing today. A few years back, we had a horrible, or was a death in a child, and this was with an oral liquid where the manufacturer left the volume off of the label. So this is Coletra. It's a drug for HIV. And it said 80 milligram per 20 milligram oral solution. It never said per ml. And it's a 60 milliliter container. And they gave the bottle thinking it was 80 milligram, 20 milligram. So this happened several times around the world. We have the drug here in the United States as well. And these are all labels that were used in Spain, Greece, France, United Kingdom, France, again, up at the top. So the company had to come out and, change that labeling. They came out with a letter. I think EMA was also involved with the communication on that a few years back as well. So this was an international problem. This points to the need for manufacturers to have practitioners review the labeling and the packaging as well as the drug name before final decisions are made by the manufacturer and the regulator to assure that things like this don't happen, because they would get feedback from the field that would point out how much is in the container. And so I think that would have been very, very helpful. This is a close-up of that label. Some of our, one of the complaints we get is the percent concentration being used rather than millimoles or milliequivalents. So you see that on the outer carton, but you also see it on the IV bag itself. And I'm talking specifically about potassium chloride in a premixed form. That's not real helpful. Most of us want to know that it has potassium chloride 20 millimole or 20 milliequivalent in that bag. And so again, the information is there. If you look down, there's a rectangle and it's in red and it says 40 milliequivalent per liter. But again, and we've been told this again and again, people don't really understand the percent. They want to see it in the name, next to the name of the drug, not in another location which may not be seen. There are several problems with this particular label, and we've complained about this to Baxter. So first of all, it has IU, the international unit. This is also no barcode. If you look at heparin, the name of the drug in the we call it the title, it says 2,000 IU per liter. So it looks like there's 2,000 units to a nurse, unless he looks at the upper right-hand corner and sees 500 ml. So there's really only 1,000. This is not safe labeling, and you can be sure that this type of mix-up has happened where you practice. It may not be a seasoned nurse who's very familiar with this. It would probably be a pharmacist or a nurse who recently graduated and doesn't have a lot of experience that would make an error like this. Probably would never even be found, never even be caught, because it wouldn't be a significant overdose that would cause bleeding if somebody had an injury, like they fell out of bed or something. Still, you don't want to see medication errors, and it could be larger quantities of heparin in a pre-mixed bag. And so I think we can do better than this. Again, 14.9% potassium chloride concentrate. Why wouldn't it say how many millimoles or milliequivalents? That's the way the drug is generally ordered. And you can hardly even see the dilution warning, which is in the red rectangle. We in the U.S., and I'm sure this is true around the world, I know there was an incident in another country that's online today. We were interacting about that with that country. We had many, many potassium chloride concentrate errors. And we set out to do something about it. This is just one that happened way back in 1990. It was one of the earliest ones that we got. We already had the reporting program then, started in 1975 as a journal column, became ISMP in 1994. But even before 94, we had problems with sterile water and potassium chloride concentrate injection looking alike. You can see the picture there right in the middle of the slide, the blue vials. And we had problems with potassium chloride concentrate looking like sodium chloride. So what would happen? Oh, somebody cleaning up when somebody intended to use potassium chloride injection, threw it back into stock, but put it in the sterile water bin or the sodium chloride bin. And it said sodium chloride on the outside of the bin or sterile water on the outside of the bin. And now a nurse goes to mix a baby's ampicillin injection with sterile water, or with saline, I should say, and draws up the potassium chloride, mixes it with KCl, and gives the child KCl injection, and the child goes into cardiac arrest and dies. This was an ongoing problem that we had. We were using it for flushing by mistake. Immediately, we contacted the companies. They changed the look-alike appearance of the labels, which was a big help. We went to the United States Pharmacopoeia, and they started requiring, and it's the only drug in the U.S. that's allowed to have a black cap and black ferrule, or the closure on the vial that holds the rubber stopper on. And it has to have the wording, must be diluted. Perhaps that has helped as well. But we went beyond that. We, in the United States, people made the recommendation that KCl injection, potassium chloride, no longer be allowed on nursing units, period. It had to be made by pharmacy. It had to be relegated to the pharmacy for IV admixture preparation, or we were very fortunate to have technology developed by the major IV providers, IV solution providers, where we were able to get pre-mixed KCl in all the major base solutions in different strengths and different volumes. And so nursing units all over the country were provided with that, or the pharmacies were, and they would dispense it directly. Our Joint Commission, which accredits hospitals, told hospitals they were not permitted to have concentrated electrolyte, KCl, on the nursing unit. We have not had a death reported in the United States for many years now in an accredited hospital. I only know of one for maybe the past 5 or 6 years. We were running 6 and 7 and 8 that we had reported, that we knew were being reported before these changes were made. So, again, these are patient deaths. You may not even know what's happening. Like I said, unless the error is recognized, you wouldn't even know what actually happened. And I'm afraid that too many times that's exactly what the case was. Even the way, the orientation of information on a label needs to be checked out. So this is Lantus, insulin glargine, which we're all familiar with. And we had a problem here with a nurse just turning the vial a little bit to the right, the one with the red rectangle. And I think you can see what happened. It looked like it was Lantus, 100 units and 10 ml. So the nurse drew up the entire vial and bolused the patient instead of with 100 units, gave the patient 1,000 units, the amount in the vial. Now, oddly enough, insulin is the only product in the United States that doesn't have to conform to the total amount of drug in the container rule. We're still interacting on that. I think it would be useful. In the U500, we use 500 unit per mil concentration here in the United States. I think it is available also in a couple other countries for insulin resistant patients. That does have the total amount per container, but not the 100 and not the 300 and not the 200. We have U200 and U300 products. Visibility of information. Obviously, you can see this is just totally unacceptable. We should not accept this from a manufacturer. It should be sent back. It should be reported to agencies. These were mix-ups between methergine and brethine. So one is methyl ergonabine and the other one is terbutaline, and they're used for divergent purposes. One increases the force of contraction of the uterus, the other one slows it down. We were giving methyl ergonabine to patients who had premature contractions. When the methyl ergonabine was given, it caused the constriction of the vasculature over the uterus and also the placenta, and unfortunately, cut the oxygen supply off to the child. And so we had a fetal demise. One of the manufacturers agreed to repackage it in a vial without the orange coating. But these are two different drugs if you look closely. The one on the right at the top, brethine, and then on the bottom, methergine. And again, these colored bands become very, very hard to read with the color on the outside of the package. Not acceptable. Not acceptable, this one. It actually says sealed for safety, but you can't read the name of the drug. We can't tolerate this. We shouldn't tolerate this. I'm unable to advance the slide, Jordan, if you can help me with that. Pardon us for just a second while we get this straightened out. There we go. Oh, not quite. Okay, great. So these are neuromuscular blocker labels, and around the world, we don't see much done with, warnings being provided, like in red print, that are very, very visible, that these are paralyzing agents. We've been doing this for so long in the United States that we've had some successes. And our Food and Drug Administration here in the States has just been wonderful. We have a whole division called the Division of Medication Error Prevention and Analysis. And we work with them almost on a daily basis, if not daily, giving feedback to one another on things that would improve labeling. And they have followed through on many of the USP recommendations and developed many on their own. And they have a guidance on their website for labeling and packaging and preventing medication errors. It's a guidance for industry. Industry doesn't have to follow it by regulation, but usually they do. And that's been very helpful. So I wanted to show you that. Oh, Jordan, we're having a problem with advancing slides again. Sorry, folks. We'll be right back. Yeah, let's keep it like that. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. So these are other countries that, again, with the neuromuscular blockers, and again, the neuromuscular blockers, if you go to Canada or the United States, you will find warnings. And I don't have, and here's lookalikes. So on the top is succinylmethonium, on the right is pancuronium, on the bottom is heparin injection. This is all from New Zealand. Same color print. Can you see how easily it would be to paralyze somebody that isn't intubated and cause their death if it wasn't recognized immediately? Yes, that's exactly what could happen. So in the US and Canada, and this was done independent of one another, we actually have labeled these products warning paralyzing agent, and we do have special labeling that does have that warning on the label. And beyond that, we've also stored these more carefully, stored them only in locations where they would absolutely be necessary. And some of us add auxiliary labels to the packaging. Another good example of labeling, and if you look at it, it's not for intravenous use, but when you hold it in your right hand, as most of us do, the warning is upside down. Or it's covered with your thumb. That's an example shown in the bottom with the PermaPen syringe. This is penicillin G benzathine, a very thick, milky, white suspension that was given intravenously, confused with propofol. And the thumb is covering the warning. We discussed a couple of other issues back in June at the summit. One was methotrexate. The EMA put out a consultation request, and they got a great response from many areas around the world. We also responded. Prescrire in France did a beautiful job at responding, making recommendations for the labeling and the packaging of these drugs. It's an ongoing problem which happens rather frequently and does cause death or serious injury, and that is when methotrexate for psoriasis or rheumatoid arthritis or some other immune moderated disease receives it daily instead of weekly. So we're moving towards better packaging here in the United States. It hasn't been accomplished yet. We put out a lot of education on it. That's not enough. So that was one that we talked about. And then another was insulin pen sharing. As you can see here in the United States, look at the bottom of the slide. These are thousands of patients that have been injected with someone else's insulin pen. When an injection is made with any of the insulin pens, there is an open channel. So if you hit a blood vessel, a vein, blood can get backed up and even be seen in the tip of the syringe. Of the barrel of the syringe. And then, of course, if that is reused on a second patient, even though you change the needle, the second patient may receive blood from the first patient. So they're in danger of hepatitis C, hepatitis B, HIV, who knows what else. There are studies that have been done. Biological examination of tissue was seen, blood cells, bacteria, squamous cells, whatever, in published articles, recent ones, American Journal of Health System Pharmacy. We can't tolerate this. Again, barcoding can help to prevent this because you're scanning the patient and you're scanning the drug. But most of us don't have barcoding. So in the U.S., we do have a little warning on the container. I don't think it's very valuable, but at least it's there. So we need to do more. We need to develop better systems. So right now, we had this summit back in June, and this was held not by us. This was held by the International Medication Safety Network and the Food and Drug Administration. And you can see perhaps at the bottom of your screen the names of regulators that did come to Washington: Anvisa in Brazil, COFEPRIS in Mexico, I pronounced it wrong probably, EMA, European Medicines Agency, Health Canada, Infarmed from Portugal, the Netherlands Medicines Evaluation Board, the MHRA from UK, Saudi Food and Drug, US Food and Drug, and we also had the World Health Organization that came to the meeting. And we met for 2 days. We came up with a number of regulations. So this is a little bit of a close-up, and those are the attendees. And we had a number of recommendations. One was to create a minimum set of best practices for labeling and packaging aimed at reducing medication errors. Promote the use of technology, and I'm talking about barcoding here, so that we could start getting barcodes on at least the drug package that holds the individual tablets, like the patient pack. We'd rather see it on individual unit dose, but many of you aren't using those systems yet. We believe fully in the unit dose system, the pre-filled syringes, pre-mixed. There is an expense associated with it, and we realize that's a problem for some areas of the world. So at least at this point, they may not be able to afford it. But we need to be prepared, because hopefully we'll have a better world, and someday everyone will be able to use these technology systems. We shouldn't stick our heads in the sand, though, and ignore this. Is an international barcode standard feasible so that we could share products? We're importing drugs because of drug shortages. You have drug shortages from time to time. You may need to import products from us. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have a barcode so they could be used immediately without our prone relabeling in the pharmacy? And we recognize that guidelines are needed regarding presentation of critical label information to deal with lookalikes, like all those logos and highly stylized graphics that detract from the readability of the label. So these are the specifics. Include both the per milliliter and per container quantity on container labels. I mentioned that to you, the heparin, for example, and the Camptosar. Eliminate the ratio expression. People don't know what that means. There have been tests of practitioners, and they could not tell you how many milligrams is in 1 to 10,000. Eliminate potentially error-prone abbreviations. Prominently display cautionary statements like must be diluted for KCL, or warning paralyzing agent for neuromuscular blockers, or warning dose weekly for methotrexate. Some of you have done that. I've seen that on some of your labels. We haven't done that here in the United States yet. Use contrasting label backgrounds, paper or ceramicized background on glass ampules. Think about how the work, how the label is oriented on ampules and syringes. We have diluents that are given instead of active drug. Why not link the two together with a rubber coupler or use a two-chambered vial? We have seen vials with both the sterile diluent and the lyophilized powder in the same unit. You can only use it after you mix it. Why not develop product-specific safety standards like the prevention of accidental methotrexate daily? And then, of course, again, the barcodes. We just think that is so important. We also held processes about medication error information. I want to tell you about something that we're going to try to do. A recommendation was made for pharmacovigilance centers to seek input from healthcare practitioners, not just their internal staff, about medication and patient safety through organizations like those that are already established. And then participants also agreed to create a white paper to promulgate these best practices. So all that is in process. We're meeting in Cascais, Portugal in October, the end of October, the 29 and 30. It's going to take some time. This isn't going to happen overnight. We have to be patient. What we would like to have you consider is reporting. We have, I'll introduce her in a second on the next slide, a full-time medication safety international fellow. And we would like to do this through the International Medication Safety Network, and we will work with them directly. But for the time being, we already have a reporting program set up. And so does Spain, and so does Canada, and so does Brazil. They already receive reports. And we work directly with the International Medication Safety Network members. We have over 20 countries. So if you have something that you would like to maybe get into process, if you would want to consider reporting through our error reporting program for now, and this will be temporary until we get something else going, we will have a space for you to put in what country. It's a very easy system. We don't ask for a lot of different information. We literally ask, tell us the story and send us the picture. Take a picture with your cell phone. That's good enough in most cases. If not, we'll get back in touch with you. We'll interact with you. Barbara will. And these are the programs that we have already. I mentioned them already. Barbara is a doctor of pharmacy, has a master's in business administration. I'm sorry, that should be public health. I'm sorry, Barb, if you're listening. It should be MPH, not MBA. She's working on behalf of IMSN and ISMP in conjunction with our colleagues in Brazil, Spain, and Canada, and other safe practice centers internationally as well. And so you would be hearing from Barb, and we will put things in process where appropriate. We'll share the information with our country coordinators or the regulator for that particular area, and let's see what can come of this. It's a way to get it started. Barb is the ISP Baxter International Medication Safety Fellow. So she's with us for 2 years. She's actually a native of Cameroon. And she's been doing a wonderful, wonderful job. She's been visiting other countries, as a matter of fact, as part of her fellowship. You may have just heard her speak at FIP in Scotland. And she also visited NHS in England, Dr. David Garrett, in a hospital there, and then also had a trip to WHO, which has, of course, the Global Medication Safety Program. And so that's it. We thank you very much for attending. Going to see, what we might have here. I only have a minute or two. Someone is communicating that they had an error with Endurex, which is a hepatitis vaccine, and there's a difference in the strength between adult and pediatric, and they mixed up, and they're asking what would be the action plan, and that is dependent on how soon it was recognized, and You know, whether you have the ability to call back the individual. Obviously, if they got 10 instead of 20, you would inject them. If they got 20, I don't think there's a problem with that from what I remember. I would recommend that you contact or go onto the website of the Immunization Action Coalition. That's a wonderful organization that's devoted to safety with vaccines, and that question has come up already. So it has been answered on their website. Let me see if we have another one that I might be able to get to. Well, it appears that that is the only question that we have. Oh, wait a minute. How to get involved with your team initiatives and any ad hoc projects. Well, again, you know, it would be interacting with the International Medication Safety Network. And so far, it has been the safe practice centers. We have a couple of pharmacovigilance centers. We have some government agencies. We have the ISMPs, et cetera. We do recognize that we have to have ways to communicate with people outside of that particular realm. It is a good topic for us to discuss, but meantime, I would just invite you to get in touch with us and tell us what ideas you have, and we would be able to follow through on something like that. So I'd be happy to do that. There are many other ones. I see one here. I've seen a near miss between hepatitis B vaccine and influenza vaccine. There's another one here. So there's lots out here. Same purple colored logo. You know, I'm sure I could go on and on. There are many, many questions I'm seeing now. You know, that I will get back to you if you left us a email. So please look for that. I'm going to end it now. Again, thanks for the support by Novartis to make this happen. I hope we can do it again someday soon. Do communicate with us. Do consider reporting from outside the United States to the program. Let us know what country you're from, and we need your contact information. And we're going to work towards setting something up with our International Medication Safety Network, but I didn't want to lose this particular opportunity. Again, thank you very, very much for joining us. We very much appreciate that, and we look forward to communicating with you again. Thank you.